Well, let's now talk to someone who knows the danger of telling the truth. Kevin Andrews, former immigration minister in the Howard government, joined me a short time ago. Kevin Andrews, thank you for joining me. You warned 9 years ago that Sudanese and Somalian crime rates here were too high, refugees were struggling to fit in, and you would have to slash the intake then. How did the media react to what you said?
Well, their reaction was not to listen to the message, and I had picked this up from, including others, frontline police who were contacting me and telling me what the problem was. Rather than listen to the issue that we had, it just became convenient for a whole lot of people to resort to calling me a racist and the like. I mean, had they heeded what I said at that time, then maybe some of the problems we're facing now might not be there.
I'm interested too in Labor. Was there anyone in Labor that was trying to understand what you were talking about, or did they join in the pile-on?
They mostly joined in the pile-on. It simply became a party political issue at the time, although having said that, I know former immigration ministers from both sides of politics who largely share the sorts of views that I have.
Well, it's weird. I was particularly concerned at the time by the role that the Victoria Police played in all this. Now, a couple of them they told the media that you were wrong to claim there was a problem with Sudanese crime rates. Police Chief Christine Nixon said that, and I'm quoting, "When we look at the data, what we're actually seeing is that they're not, in a sense, represented more than the proportion of them in the population." And a Victoria Police multicultural liaison officer in Dandenong, where many of these refugees were living, said there's an underrepresentation of the Sudanese in the crime stats compared to all other more common cultures within Australia. Now, were those claims by the police true?
No, they weren't, and it's subsequently been shown that the claims that there was an underrepresentation in relation to particular groups was false. There was a softly attitude by the Victoria Police Force under Christine Nixon, and I think under her successor as well, in which they weren't prepared to actually address the issues. It's one thing, and it's important to have community policing. I've got great community policing in my own electorate, but when you need a tough response, then you have to have it. And at that time, under the police force in Victoria and its leadership and command, and indeed under the government at the time, they simply weren't prepared to address the issues which were arising. I was being contacted by frontline police officers who were actually telling me what the issues were, and that was totally contrary to what the leadership of Victoria Police was saying at the time.
But this is a really serious issue, though. I understand the media, I don't forgive it, but I understand the media losing its head. I understand Labor making political capital. I don't forgive that either, though. What I cannot accept in any way is how the police could intervene in a highly charged and important public debate like this and put out what seems to be false information. What does that say about the trust that the public can have in police when the issue is about ethnic crime?
Well, I would hope that the circumstances with the Victoria Police and indeed any other police force around Australia is different to what it was then. It did seem to me at the time that the police command were engaging politically in a situation that they should not have. I've never had any explanation from Christine Nixon or anybody else as to why they did that at the time. It's really... it was annoying at the time, to be sure, but what's worse about it is that it was misleading the general public as to the situation, particularly in Victoria. And what we see now with the apex gangs and the like is a situation that most people are very concerned about. And had we been able to stop that by having a tougher cop on the beat approach, then I suspect most people would applaud that.
You've now seen Immigration Minister Peter Dutton attacked for saying that Malcolm Fraser made a mistake by taking Muslim Lebanese immigrants 40 years ago, who were often unskilled and illiterate. First off, was Peter Dutton right? Did Malcolm Fraser make a mistake?
I believe Malcolm Fraser did make a mistake. It was quite clear from the papers that have been released from that time that both the department and indeed his immigration minister at the time argued a different course of action, but Malcolm Fraser decided to take that course of action. Mr Fraser's not around obviously to explain his thinking at the time, but as a matter of fact I think we can conclude that Malcolm Fraser was wrong.
But again, we've seen exactly the same sort of thing that happened to you now done to Peter Dutton. Labor and many in the media have attacked him as a racist. Now, how hard is it to tell the truth about immigration and ethnic crime in this country?
Well, these two incidents, a decade apart, show the great difficulties of it. But my experiences, and after all, I represent an electorate that's got a large ethnic population from many different parts of the world, Andrew. My experience of ordinary Australians is they want to know the facts, they want to know the truth, and they'll make up their mind about that. But there's this tendency on the left in particular at the moment to engage in this politics of identity and group rights and the like, and rather than argue their case, they simply slam somebody as being racist or some other put down such as that in a way to actually avoid a discussion about the real issue. Issues like this don't go away unless we address them and find some solutions.
Now, I want to get to those particular issues in a second. Before I do that, one criticism that I'm prepared to concede it has some weight and needs to be considered, and that is that speaking the truth, as you did, as I do, as Peter Dutton does, on this issue can be divisive and hurtful. That, you know, there's a risk that some people out there will think, well, this tars all refugees with the same brush, none of them can be trusted, which clearly is not what we mean and not the truth either. But there is that danger. Do you accept that criticism, that honesty comes at a cost that some refugees trying their best to fit in do have to pay then?
Well, if you look at my comments, and indeed you look at Peter Dutton's comments now, they've also been made in the context of praising immigration. I mean, I'm a great supporter of immigration to Australia. I don't see our future without immigration because our population otherwise would fall, the birth rate's low. So we have to, in my view, support an immigration program into the future. But immigration in Australia has always been a touchy subject over the decades and indeed over the centuries. And that is that the Australian populace need to have confidence that the government is in control of the program, that it's for their benefit overall, and that any difficulties that arise from time to time will be addressed. Immigration is not just people arriving in Australia. Unless we also carefully consider and put in place a proper settlement program so that people can get education if they need it, they can get employment, they don't end up on a lifetime on welfare, then immigration is actually failing certain groups of people. And that's what I've been saying for a long time now. Indeed, it's what Peter Dutton has been saying recently.
I have to say, though, you know, after our experience with the Lebanese Muslim intake, after our experience with the Sudanese and to a lesser extent the Somalian refugee intake, the question really has to... Oh, and also we're facing problems with the Afghan refugee intake. Is it now not time to ask whether our refugee program is in fact in Australia's national interest, and whether it wouldn't be better if we helped refugees more where they were overseas? You'd spread the benefit to a wider number of people. Bringing them here is very expensive and at less danger to ourselves.
Well, Andrew, we may differ on this, but I think we have some ethical responsibility, moral responsibility, being a rich, wealthy country as we are, where we can take people, to actually take those people. But I think what's important is when we bring people into Australia, as I said before, we've got to make sure that we don't just stop the process there, that we look at what investment is needed in them to make sure that they can enjoy the sort of living and the lifestyle that the rest of us in this country need. And if that means slowing down an intake from a particular location, or it means slowing down the number in the program so you get the settlement issues right, then I believe that's the responsible thing to do. You're right in the sense that there are millions of refugees in the world and we can't take them all, and none of the countries in the world can. And most will end up where they are now or going back, returning to their own home when conflict dissolves. So yes, we've got to put a lot of effort into helping people. You know, those who have fled from Syria and Iraq, for example, most are not going to go very far beyond the countries in which they are at the present time. We've got to help them there, and hopefully when the conflict is over, help them to return to their own homelands.
I just wonder, though, whether we haven't become a little bit of a soft touch, whether the refugee problem is actually something much different to what most people imagine. Now, we've just had our colleague Laura Jays come back from Nauru, where she's looked at conditions there. She says many boat people there are not keen to take up the deal that Malcolm Turnbull has made with the US President, Barack Obama, to send them over there instead. Can I just play you a little bit of a tape, a bit of Laura's report from one of them?
You don't prefer the United States. Why not?
Because I am a Muslim. You know, the President-elect Donald Trump doesn't like Muslim in their country as a migrant.
Okay,
well,
Kevin, your response to that comment?
It's very surprising, Andrew, because for tens of millions of people around the world, America has been the great destination of choice. I think this partly reflects that people have been perhaps sold a story by the people smugglers and sold a story by those who keep advocating for them to come to Australia, that Australia is the place to come to if they just hang out. But if you're a refugee and you're given a chance, what many people would regard, what millions of people around the world will regard as a chance in a lifetime to go and make a new life in America, then it's very surprising for people to say they don't want to take that up.
But this is the whole point. This is no longer a refugee issue at all. I mean, these are people that have flown to presumably Indonesia, so they could have been safe there. They could have been safe wherever maybe they, interrupted their flight if that's what they did. They're now safe in Nauru. They would be very safe in America. This is not about a refugee problem at all, is it anymore?
The problem is that the Refugee Convention was essentially written at the end of the Second World War. It was designed largely for people in Eastern Europe. Now, we're in a whole different circumstance now to what that was. And the reality is that, yes, there are genuine humanitarian refugees, but there are also people, and naturally enough, who for economic reasons would prefer to be in a different country. And for someone to say that I don't want to go to America, I only want to go to Australia, I think that shows a selectivity that most Australians would fail to understand.
Now, this deal to send our boat people in Nauru and Manus Island to America, that deal was made by Malcolm Turnbull with Barack Obama, but of course Donald Trump will be president from January 20 and has not yet ticked off on it. Can this deal work, do you think?
I believe it can, Andrew. Some people may well move prior to the inauguration of Mr Trump as president. After that, obviously, it's a matter for the new administration and the government in Australia. But I believe that there is every possibility that this will work.
And you think it's a bit too generous for me? I just wonder whether it's telling boat people that first prize will be to land in Australia, and if you don't get that, second will be America. That'll be a pretty good incentive, I would have thought.
Well, that's the underlying concern, but as you indicated earlier in those remarks from the person on Nauru who didn't want to go to America, it's quite surprising actually, that maybe, it won't be seen that way by such people.
Now, you're now on the backbench with Tony Abbott since Malcolm Turnbull took over. You've had a long career on the front bench. Do you seriously think that the 23 cabinet ministers that Malcolm Turnbull has in place at the moment are all better than you two?
Well, Andrew, I'm not going to, make a comment on this. All I would say is that it doesn't matter whether it's the local football club or a small business or a corporation or government. Usually the best way to manage that is to have the most talented and experienced people as part of the executive. And that's ultimately a question for the Prime Minister. But I'm ready to serve in any way I can the people of Australia.
Are you frustrated being on the backbench?
I'm not frustrated, Andrew. I've had periods on the backbench. I've been on the backbench in opposition and in government. I've been on the front bench in opposition and in government. It's not, in my view, about me. It's about what's best for the government and what's ultimately best for the people of Australia. We live in challenging times and, you know, I believe that we need the best team to lead the government currently.
Well, you might well say that, given that the government has been struggling in all the polls. What do you put that down to?
Ever since I've been in Parliament, which is almost 26 years now, Andrew, that sometime after an election into a new term, the government of the day is behind in the polls. There's nothing necessarily unusual about that. I think what's important for the government now is two things. One, to make sure that it is genuinely listening to the concerns of the Australian people, because if you don't, then they will see through that fairly quickly. And then secondly, to spell out clearly in very practical terms where we want to take Australia. And that's important, and if we don't do that, well, then we'll be marked down by the people of Australia.
Have you been doing that?
Well, I think we're trying to do that, and I think we've always got to do a better job. It doesn't matter what government over the years that I've observed or been part of, we can always do a better job, but the fundamental principles remain the same. That is to listen, to take into account the concerns of the people, and then seek to articulate clearly a practical program that's going to lead to a better standard of living and a better way of life for them and their children. The great Australian dream is to hand on to the next generation a better standard of living, a better way of life than we've inherited, and that's always been the case, or always will, and it's incumbent upon the government of the day, regardless of which party is in power, to do that for the Australian people. It's an ongoing conversation which involves listening and leading.
Kevin Andrews, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure, Andrew.